All right, greetings, friends, and welcome to Lecture 4 of The Pivot. In this lecture, I want us to talk a little bit about where we ended in Lecture 3 about a mature hermeneutic. One that has the capacity to be self-reflective. Now, this particular lecture is going to be a little shorter than the others, but I wanted to camp out here for a moment because I think the key to empathy and humility, those two necessary virtues for navigating difference, is located in our capacity to become aware of how we've been shaped, the perspectives we've held, the stories we've believed, the truths that we've assumed, to embrace and celebrate those, yes, but also to hold those truths, those assumptions, those perspectives with some genuine openness that perhaps they're not complete. And self-reflection is necessary for us to avoid self-deception or self-aggrandizement or self-justification or self-righteousness. All of these happen when we lack the capacity to be reflective on the nature of how we understand our place in this world. And so what I'm inviting us into is a bit of exploration. Part of what you're going to do in your 8 chapter heading stories is you're going to take a journey into a little bit of self-reflection in which you come to understand, name the stories, the episodes, the perspectives in your life that have informed who you are. And we have to become aware of our preconceived ideas and the assumptions we have about who the other is. So if I enter into engagement of difference and I haven't even come to terms with how I tend to see others of difference, then I might sabotage that interaction from the get-go. I might make statements that are unfair or uncomplimentary or even what we call microaggressive because of the limited and skewed perspective we have about the situation that we're stepping in on. We might be so consumed with the limitations of our cultural perspective that we start to believe that any difference in our lives is deficiency. And I want to say some difference is not deficiency, it's just difference. And for me, that is rooted in my belief that God's creative order for humanity is this beautiful mosaic. And I want us to believe and embrace that for a moment. I want us to believe and embrace the reality and the truth that God's mosaic in his difference is absolutely extraordinary, beautiful. But we tend to not see that when we become so entrenched and we're unaware of the very views and assumptions that we hold that limit our ability to embrace different. And even the ways in which we believe this world should work. And a lot of that is rooted either in our moral foundations that we're going to talk about in section 6 or in our cultural background. You might find that in the Western culture, we live in what's called a flattened hierarchical structure, that people are really on the same level as each other, even if they've got different positions, and so we don't afford a lot of respect based upon title and position. If you go to other countries, they have what's called a hierarchical, where people hold status in the community based upon whether it's their age or their title or their role, and there's a certain respect that is given to them immediately. And one of the things we have to realize is that if I just assume that the flat is the way to go, I won't give proper credit to the way in which the world has worked according to someone else's structure. Now, every structure, every framework may have sin rooted in it, may have corruption and perversion rooted in it, but we have to be able to be reflective enough to understand that maybe the assumptions I make about the world aren't always adequate or accurate. We talk about what might color the lenses. We began that conversation on Monday. But I want to say that what we talked about on Monday shapes how we understand, and this is a word that I want you to understand, is implicit biases. These are the assumptions that we hold that are not always explicit. We don't always talk about them or even necessarily realize that they're there, but they're there. And they're always constantly operating like the software in our lives in the background of our lives. And they're already coloring the pictures, my perception of the person who walks by, my interpretation of a news story on the television, the conversations that I have around the quad or in our dorms are already being impacted by our implicit bias. Now, I'm not asking us to do the unrealistic, which is to rid ourselves of all implicit biases. That's not what I'm suggesting. What I'm suggesting is we have to become aware of those implicit biases so that when they emerge, sometimes they're going to be adequate. Sometimes our implicit biases may actually be a trigger warning us of some danger that we need to be aware of, some previous experience that we've had that it helps to alert us to a situation in the future that is seeming a lot like that. And sometimes it can be beneficial. Sometimes it can be helpful. Sometimes it's corruptive and destructive. And we, through an intentional bit of self-reflection, this is why when we get into section 5 on spiritual disciplines, the idea of solitude and journaling becomes so vital. We're able to work through, process through, analyze, investigate the very elements of life that pervert and corrupt our sense of how this world ought to work. And we're able to name those things, work through them, pray through them, at least confess them, even if you're not a follower of Jesus. So that as we enter into those scenarios, we tend to be at least alerted to that I might come with a set of presumptions. I have found that one of the greatest opportunities for navigating difference is being able to even confess those to the people that I'm standing with. Being able to acknowledge, this is who I am, this is how I see the world, and this is what has impacted and affected me. And so you just need to know this about me going into it, because it's possible that how we interact with one another is going to be colored by my implicit biases. So that mature sense of self-reflection is key and vital for how you and I begin to move forward.